An African man walked into a bank in Dubai and somehow managed to form a relationship with the bank's manager. After that, he convinced him that a sorcerer could double money using jinn and black magic. Through this, the sorcerer managed to get the bank manager to wear a ring on his finger and made him transfer amounts that reached up to $242 million. Later, the African sorcerer traveled to America and started spending his newfound wealth on everything he desired, from cars to houses, jewelry, and even women. But later on, he got involved in a case with the US government. This is one of the strangest and most bizarre stories I've ever come across. A scam on a completely different level. So make sure you stick around till the end and don't miss any of it. Peace be upon you. This is Shams Al-Din. The story we're talking about today, when I first started looking into it, the first thing I felt was that it might be a lie or made up. But after digging deeper, I found out it was true. So I thought maybe there was some exaggeration in the details, like the amount mentioned could be less, maybe not reaching $242 million. But no, there's a case in the US courts confirming this amount, and there are lawyers' testimonies, and a lot of evidence confirming the story and its details. We'll see all of that in this video. So what I want to get across to you is that even if you feel like the events are exaggerated and sometimes illogical, just wait and finish the story, and you'll see the evidence that confirms these events. The main character in this story is a man named Futanga Babani Sissoko. Sissoko came from the African country of Mali. Mali, of course, is not an Arab country, but it is a Muslim country where 95% of the population is Muslim. The events of this story go back to 1995, so the story is about 30 years old. That year, Sissoko went to Dubai. Dubai, of course, was and still is a major tourist and economic hub in the region. So many people from different countries and ethnicities go to Dubai to start businesses or trade. And the banks in Dubai are an important part of this economy. Sissoko entered Dubai with a work visa or a business visa, then went to a bank called Dubai Islamic Bank, which is one of the largest banks in Dubai. Sissoko went straight to the main branch, and there he met the staff. Immediately, he asked to meet the bank manager. The staff was surprised because usually no one just walks in and asks to meet the bank manager directly. The bank manager is supposed to be a busy man, and no one can meet him without a prior appointment. But Sissoko insisted and pressed them that he wanted to meet the bank manager, and somehow the matter reached the manager, whose name was Mohammed Ayub, and it seems that he agreed. Seems like this was the first strange and illogical event in the story. How could a regular guy, a foreigner to the country who just arrived, suddenly managed to meet the manager of one of the biggest banks? The only explanation that came to my mind is that he was persistent, kept insisting for hours until it reached the manager, who eventually agreed. Anyway, Sissoko managed to get to the bank manager, Mohammed Ayub. The manager said, "Tell me, what do you want?" Sissoko replied that he wanted a loan to buy a car. Of course, there are certain conditions to get a loan, the most important being that the person has a job and a source of income. And it's likely that Sissoko didn't meet these conditions, especially since he had just arrived in Dubai. But somehow, Sissoko convinced the bank manager to give him the loan. I don't know what guarantees he offered, but he was able to persuade him. The manager agreed to the loan, maybe just to get rid of him, since it was clear Sissoko had the skill of persistence. But it didn't stop there. Sissoko thanked the manager and asked him to visit his apartment, saying, "I want you to come over for dinner." The bank manager probably didn't agree right away, but Sissoko kept insisting, saying, "You helped me and made things easy for me, so it's my duty to show you hospitality." He added, "When you visit me, I'll show you an amazing surprise that you've never seen in your life." something I brought from my country and culture." The manager was hesitant, but Sissoko's persistence made him lean toward accepting. And when Sissoko started talking about the surprise and the strange thing he'd show the manager, curiosity got to him, and he said, "All right, I'll come for dinner." Sure enough, when the time came, Mohammed Ayub, the bank manager, arrived at the apartment address Sissoko had given him. He knocked on the door, and Sissoko opened it, warmly welcoming him in. The manager sat down, and they started chatting and making small talk. After a while, after Sissoko had treated the manager with hospitality, he said, "It's time for the surprise I promised you." Sissoko got up and opened the door to one of the rooms. The manager looked inside and saw that the room was completely dark, with smoke or incense rising from it. And there were figures, statues, and other strange things. The room looked like it was from another world. At this point, Sissoko began to explain, saying to the manager, "I'm a sorcerer. I can use jinn to double money. If you bring me any amount, I'll double it for you. You bring me 100, I'll give you 200. You bring me 1,000,000, I'll give you 2,000,000. The bank manager was listening to Sissoko and looking at the room, trying to wrap his mind around the situation. Most of us, if we found ourselves in such a situation, would probably run away immediately. But it seems the manager's curiosity got the better of him, especially back in the 90s, when stories about magic and jinn were considered more legendary than they are today, and people were more fascinated by them, believing them more, unaware that most of it was just trickery and lies, a way to scam people. I mean, if this sorcerer was real and could double money, why would he be asking for a loan? Why would he need money from the bank manager in the first place? Anyway, the bank manager asked Sissoko, "Any amount I bring you, you'll double it?" Sissoko replied, "Yes." So the manager called one of his relatives and said, "Bring me an amount of 100,000 dirhams, which is roughly $25,000. When the money arrived, the manager handed it to Sissoko, and they both entered the dark room, the room that really looked like a sorcerer's lair. There was a setup on the floor in the middle of the room, so Sissoko sat down and placed the money in front of him, while the manager stood in place watching. Suddenly, music started playing throughout the apartment, and Sissoko threw something into the incense burners, making the smoke rise even thicker. Strange sounds began to be heard, and Sissoko started moving his body side to side. Then suddenly, the electricity in the entire apartment went out, and the place was plunged into total darkness. It was only moments later that a loud noise came from one of the other rooms in the apartment, and suddenly its door burst open, and a man ran out screaming, saying a jinn had attacked him. The bank manager was freaked out and didn't know what to do. Sissoko smiled at him and said, "Don't worry, this is normal. But the jinn might not be comfortable with you here since you're a stranger to the place. So it's best if you step outside the apartment for a bit until I finish the money doubling process." The bank manager listened to him and immediately left the apartment, standing outside, waiting in fear from what he had just seen. He kept hearing the sounds of music and things moving inside the apartment, and even heard thunder and saw flashes of light, with smoke rising from under the door. After a while, things quieted down. The noises stopped, and the apartment door opened with Sissoko standing at the door. He said to the bank manager, "Please, come in." The manager went inside, and the apartment was filled with smoke, but the first thing he saw was the money on the table. Sissoko pointed to the money and said to the manager, "Here's your doubled money. You gave me 100,000, and now it's in front of you as 200,000. The manager walked over to the table, took the money, and checked it with his hands. Sure enough, There were 200,000, double the amount he had given to Sissoko. At that moment, the bank manager bought into the whole act. The offer Sissoko made, with the help of some tricks, fully convinced him that Sissoko was a sorcerer, and he no longer had any doubts. By the way, this money-doubling trick was a type of scam that was common in the 90s, and there were people, particularly from African nationalities, who would pull off these schemes. Some of you might even know people or relatives who got scammed in similar ways. If you have stories like this that happen to someone close to you or someone you know, feel free to share them in the comments. The difference between our story in this video and any other scam story is that ours is the biggest. There's no other scam that compares to the massive amount of money this operation involved. Bank manager Mohammed Ayub fell into the trap and believed that Sissoko was a sorcerer who could double money. From here, he started sending Sissoko large amounts of money on a regular basis. He opened a special account for him at the bank and kept transferring funds into that account. And here's where the strangest part of the story begins. The bank manager kept sending these huge sums to Sissoko without ever seeing them doubled, yet he continued making the transfers, which eventually amounted to millions, all from the bank's money. Imagine that between 1995 and 1998, the bank manager made 183 transfers to Sissoko's accounts. We're not just talking about accounts in Dubai, but accounts in different countries around the world, in the US, Switzerland, and France. The total of these transfers reached $242 million. I know it's hard to believe, and there are a lot of questions that need answers. There are many things that don't make sense and are difficult to understand about what happened. Even I, as I said, when I started researching the story, I began to doubt its credibility, until I later saw the evidence and testimonies that I'll share some of with you during this story. These pieces of evidence and testimonies confirm that these millions were transferred to Sissoko, and that he was spending and using them. One of the main questions going through your minds right now is, why did the bank manager keep sending all this money, even though Sissoko wasn't doubling it for him? Why would he send him millions for no reason? Honestly, I don't have a solid explanation for this, only conclusions. Some have concluded that Sissoko was a real sorcerer, not just a con artist, and that he was able to use magic to cloud the bank manager's mind, making him continue to send these huge amounts. The second possible conclusion is that the manager was afraid. Maybe he truly believed that Sissoko was a sorcerer and was scared that he would harm him or his family if he didn't follow his orders. The third possible conclusion is that Sissoko was blackmailing the manager with something. Maybe when the manager sent him the first amount, which was surely a large sum, Sissoko refused to double or return it, and kept threatening to expose him if he didn't continue the transfers. These are the conclusions I've reached. Some of them seem somewhat logical, but they remain just conclusions, and unfortunately, there's no definite answer as to what exactly happened. The second question that comes to mind is, how did such massive amounts of money leave the bank over 3 years without anyone noticing or speaking up? Even if the bank manager was the highest-ranking official at the bank, there are surely accountants and regular audits that happen. So how did no one notice such a huge sum over the course of 3 years? This might be the most puzzling question in this story. So, try to figure out that the banking system at that time was different, and maybe the accounting systems weren't as advanced as they are today. We're talking about an incident that's about 30 years old, but honestly, this is still a weak conclusion because no matter what, the amount is just too massive, $242 million. How did no one notice or speak up about that? So, like you, when I got to this part of the story, I started doubting its credibility. I even thought it was just made up. But what I saw later the evidence I'll show you, and what Sissoko did with the money afterward confirms that he had this amount, maybe even more. Here's where we start the second chapter of this story: the luxurious life Sissoko lived. Of course, as we said, this story started in 1995. After Sissoko tricked the bank manager and got millions from him, he decided to leave Dubai and return to his home country, Mali, for a while. During this time, the bank manager kept transferring millions of dollars to Sissoko's account, while Sissoko lived in Mali for several months in his hometown, a village called Dabia. Weird, its name sounds like Dubai. Dabia. Of course, like many villages in Mali and Africa in general, Dabia was a poor village. Suddenly, Sissoko returned to his village and started showering the people with gifts and financial help, and he began opening businesses there, literally boosting the village's economy. The entire village started seeing him as a father figure and savior. They even called him Baba Sura, and he became beloved by everyone, seen as a role model. Sissoko continued this way in the village for several months, then decided to travel to America, specifically to New York City. And the bank manager's transfers were still coming. Now, we're in early 1996. Sissoko arrived in New York, and there, he decided to open an account in the biggest American bank at that time. So, he went to the main branch of the bank in New York, and there he met one of the employees, and somehow, he convinced her to marry him. It's clear that he used his wealth to win her over, even though she knew he was already married to several wives. Sissoko had more than 4 wives, even though he was Muslim and was supposed to follow the limit on wives. He had wives in Africa, in Europe, and even in America. This man seems to have had a long history, even before the Dubai case. What was the logic behind this marriage? Maybe to avoid anything forbidden, or maybe he had other reasons. The important thing is that marrying this employee, who worked at Citibank, had a main goal, which was to make things easier for him with the bank, because he wanted to transfer most of his money from Dubai to America. And sure enough, Sissoko transferred over $1 million from his account in Dubai to his account at Citibank in America. Of course, his new wife, the employee at Citibank, made things easier for him. Maybe he didn't really need her help, but she definitely made things go more smoothly. Honestly, I'm not sure if she knew what her new husband was up to, if she knew he was a scammer, or if she just thought he was a rich guy. The important thing is that she helped him move his money from Dubai to America, and in return, he gave her a gift worth $500,000, and he kept spending on her regularly. To confirm for you that this massive amount left Dubai and reached Citibank in America, you can check out this evidence. I'll put the link below the video. This page documents the details of the lawsuit that Dubai Islamic Bank filed in 1999 against Citibank in America. This is a documented case that happened in New York courts between the two banks. The details of the case are that Dubai Islamic Bank accused Citibank of, between 1995 and 1998, helping 3 Citibank employees, and the names of the employees are shown in front of you, one of whom was Sissoko's wife. According to the case, these 3 employees helped a man named Futanga Babani Sissoko in a money laundering operation. So, was the amount mentioned in the case? Yes, it was mentioned in the court documents that the amount was $151 million. This is undeniable proof. Despite all the questions that come to mind and all the illogical and unexplained things, this story is real. Sissoko was able to transfer $151 million from his account at Dubai Islamic Bank to his account at Citibank in the US. And of course, other amounts were transferred during these 3 years, from 1995 to 1998. But the accounts were different. some even in other countries. As we said, the total amount would reach $242 million. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. This case came later, after Dubai Islamic Bank discovered what was going on. Let's go back to the time when Sissoko transferred the money from Dubai to the US. Of course, Sissoko was very happy when the money reached the US, because it was now safe. Dubai Islamic Bank wouldn't be able to seize or recover the funds. And so, Sissoko began living like a king in America, spending lavishly and buying whatever he wanted. Imagine that it got to the point where he bought airplanes and started an airline named after his village, calling it Dabia Airlines. He bought a small private jet and 2 Boeing 727 planes, which can hold 180 people. His goal was to start an airline, but the planes he bought weren't new. They were old and used. Even with all that money, airplanes are still incredibly expensive. This was one of his ambitious ideas, starting an airline, but in the end, the planes stayed grounded at the airport and only flew occasionally. The airline he dreamed of never materialized. This was one of Sissoko's habits. He'd get excited about an idea, spend millions on it, and then abandon it. And of course, with all these projects and things he was buying and spending his money on, Sissoko didn't forget his family and his people. He kept supporting his village, helping them out, and his popularity continued to grow, spreading even to neighboring regions and villages. When his plane would land, people would gather to welcome him with flowers and hugs, and he didn't hold back. He showered them with gifts and good fortune. But things took a turn for the worse in July 1996. At that time, Sissoko tried to buy 2 military helicopters that belonged to the U.S. Army, which had been out of service since the Vietnam War. Sissoko submitted a request to the U.S. government to buy the helicopters, claiming that his reason for wanting them was to convert them into air ambulances to transport the injured, as he wanted to use them in his village, where he had built hospitals and clinics. However, this request was blocked by the U.S. government, which doubted his intentions. They feared he might use the helicopters for illegal activities like drug smuggling, or even transport them back to his country, equip them with weapons, and use them in the civil conflicts there. After all, these were military helicopters that could have weapons mounted on them. When the request was denied, Sissoko's followers tried to speed up the process illegally, attempting to bribe an official with $30,000 to get it done. Interestingly, this bribe wasn't ordered by Sissoko. It was something his followers did on their own. But, unfortunately for them, it turned out that the official was honest, and instead of helping them, he reported them to the authorities, who arrested them. And of course, after interrogating them, they found out that they were Sissoko's followers. So, Sissoko became wanted in connection with this bribery case. But at that time, Sissoko wasn't in America, so the matter was handed over to Interpol, the international police, and they issued a global warrant for his arrest. And sure enough, not long after, Sissoko was arrested. But where was he arrested? In Geneva, Switzerland. Why was he in Switzerland? Because he was going there to open a new bank account, as Switzerland is known as a global banking hub. After the Swiss police arrested Sissoko, they placed him in a Geneva prison while awaiting extradition to America. Of course, Sissoko immediately hired American lawyers to defend him in this case, and his main attorney was named Thomas Spencer. Sissoko asked this lawyer, Thomas, to fly to Switzerland and meet with him in prison there to discuss the case and the upcoming legal steps. Thomas Spencer said he traveled to Geneva and went to the prison where Sissoko was being held. Before he entered to meet Sissoko, he met with the prison director. The prison director asked him, "Are you going to take Sissoko to America?" The lawyer replied, "We don't know yet. We'll see." The prison director then said, "Please, try to delay the transfer as long as possible." The lawyer was surprised and asked, "Why? What's in it for you?" The prison director replied, "Nothing. It's just that Sissoko brings us gourmet meals from Paris by plane every night, and we're enjoying the situation." From that moment, the lawyer realized he was dealing with a one-of-a-kind person. After that, Sissoko was transferred to the U.S. to stand trial for the bribery case, specifically to Miami, Florida, because that's where the bribery case took place. The first thing the lawyer did was request a bail hearing, meaning he asked the court and judge to release Sissoko on bail until his trial. The U.S. government and the prosecutor were completely against any bail, feeling that something was off about the whole thing. They didn't want to give him a chance and were pressuring the judge not to release him on bail, arguing there was a significant risk of him fleeing. On the other hand, Sissoko was rallying strong support for himself. When someone has wealth like Sissoko, no matter how they got it, they can form powerful connections with important people. Sissoko had relationships with officials and diplomats in America, and he used these connections to gather support for his bail hearing. A large number of diplomats and high-profile figures from various embassies and positions showed up, and the judge himself said in the court record that he had never seen so many diplomats in a courtroom before. All these diplomats, officials, and high-profile figures testified on behalf of Sissoko, claiming he was an honorable and highly respected man. Sissoko's lawyer used these testimonies to strengthen his case in court, assuring the judge that his client was a man of high status in society and there was no way he would flee. He also stated that Sissoko was willing to pay a large bail amount to guarantee he wouldn't flee. The judge felt a lot of pressure, especially since the prosecutor and government were urging him not to grant bail. So, the judge decided to set an astronomical bail amount that had never been seen before in any court in the world. He set the bail at $20 million. The judge thought this amount was impossible for Sissoko to pay. But after the lawyer and the defense team consulted with Sissoko and understood the situation, the judge was shocked when the lawyer replied that Sissoko would pay the bail. And that's exactly what happened. The bail was paid, and Sissoko was released. The first thing he did after his release was gift the lawyer and the defense office, including the lawyer's assistants and those who worked on the case, 7 cars, 3 Mercedes, and 4 Jaguars. The lawyer and his team were stunned. It was the first time they had ever received such wild gifts from a client. Remember, the trial wasn't over yet, and all that happened was a bail release until the trial date. Sissoko was required to stay in Miami until his trial, but that wasn't a problem for him. So basically, Miami is one of those cities where you can get anything you want if you have the money, and Sissoko didn't have any shortage of it. During the time he was waiting for his trial, he went on a massive spending spree. People around him would say that he would walk into jewelry stores and drop $500,000 in one go. At a car dealership, they said he'd come by every week and buy anywhere from 2 to 4 cars each time. And of course, there's no need to even mention clothing stores, restaurants, and all that. Sissoko lived an extravagant life in Miami, and on top of that, he got married to several women during this time, probably more than 10 women in Miami alone. And he put each one in her own private apartment. He rented over 20 apartments. It's clear he was interested in marriage not out of faith, but for other reasons. On the other side, the manager of Dubai Islamic Bank was still sending him money. Not only that, but Sissoko had credit cards from the bank with no limit, so he could spend as much as he wanted. And any debt that piled up on those cards, the bank manager would just erase it and make it disappear like it never existed. And it still baffles me. Why was the bank manager doing this? Was he really under a spell? Was he threatened? Was he scared? It's a strange mystery. Anyway, during this time while Sissoko was living in Miami waiting for his trial, he didn't forget about charity and helping others, because that was important for improving his public image and getting sympathy and support. It was supposed to help him later in court. He would go out on the streets of Miami, visit poor areas, and donate to the homeless and needy. He'd help them with food, clothes, and all that. And it was all documented by the media to improve his image. One time, he helped out a school band. This band wanted to go to New York to participate in the big Thanksgiving Day parade, and Sissoko donated $300,000 to them, which was way more than they needed for the trip to New York. The band thanked him and even played him a special song as a token of their appreciation. So yeah, Sissoko was working hard to polish his image in Miami, thinking it would make his trial easier and gain him public support. Finally, in March 1997, the trial date arrived. The trial was for the bribery case related to the purchase of the helicopters. And as you remember, I told you the bribery attempt was something Sissoko's men did on their own. He didn't order or direct them to bribe anyone. Sissoko's lawyers told him to plead not guilty, especially after they reviewed the audio recordings of the conversations, which clearly showed Sissoko saying, "Do everything you can to finish the helicopter deal and get them here quickly, but don't break U.S. law." So, the lawyers advised him to plead innocent and claim that even though these men were his followers, he wasn't guilty. But Sissoko went against his lawyers' advice and pleaded guilty in court, taking full responsibility for the case. The lawyers were shocked and didn't understand why he did that. His main lawyer, Thomas Spencer, was even angry and tried to figure out the reason, but Sissoko wouldn't give him an answer. The lawyer felt something weird was going on, and sure enough, years after the case, it was discovered that Sissoko might have done it on purpose to stop the U.S. government's investigations. Because if he hadn't pleaded guilty to this case, the government might have kept coming after him. So he decided to plead guilty to avoid drawing more attention. Sissoko's sentence wasn't that bad. He was sentenced to 43 days in prison and fined $250,000. The bribery case wasn't a huge deal because the bribe was only $30,000, and the whole thing was about 2 old, decommissioned helicopters. So, it wasn't a sensitive case. Sissoko went to a federal prison in Florida, which was just a regular prison, not maximum security or anything like that. After serving about half of his sentence, the government offered him a deal to finish the rest of his time under house arrest in exchange for a generous donation to a homeless shelter. So, Sissoko agreed and donated $1 million to the homeless shelter. And in return, he was released to finish the rest of his sentence under house arrest in one of his homes. After completing his sentence and becoming a free man again, Sissoko immediately decided to leave the U.S. and return to his home country. His plane took off, and he went back to Mali, where he was greeted with a big, warm welcome at the airport, as usual. By 1998, the bank manager's transfers to Sissoko were still going on, and Sissoko wasn't holding on to that money. He was spending it quickly, either on failed projects like Dhabi Air or on his followers and the people around him. He liked playing the Robin Hood role. Even his lawyer says that while he was in the U.S., specifically in Miami while waiting for his trial, he was spending about $1 million a month on gifts for the people around him. That's just in the U.S. So imagine what it was like in his home country. Definitely even more, with family and relatives. As they say, it's not hard to be generous with other people's money. Despite all the huge sums being sent to him, the money never stayed with him long. He was constantly asking the bank manager for more transfers, and the manager kept sending them. No one knew why or how, but no matter how long it went on, it was only a matter of time before this strange operation would be exposed. And, sure enough, In March 1998, it seems that some of the bank's accountants noticed something and started asking questions. The bank manager began to feel the pressure, especially since he hadn't been able to contact Sissoko for a while. According to the story, the bank manager decided to confess to one of his close colleagues. When he sat down with him, he didn't even know how to bring it up, how to tell him that he had transferred all this money to an African man from another country because he believed he was under a spell. The whole thing sounded unbelievable. According to the story, the bank manager was so embarrassed that he couldn't even tell his colleague the total amount he had transferred to the African wizard. Instead, he wrote the amount on a piece of paper and handed it to him. The amount was 890 million dirhams, which equals around $242 million. Of course, his colleague was shocked and knew this would be the end of the bank. It was impossible for the bank to survive after such a huge loss. And sure enough, news started to spread, and panic began to set in, especially among the bank's clients, once they learned the bank was facing financial difficulties. People were scared for their money, and this could have caused a massive run on the bank, with everyone rushing to withdraw their funds, which would have made things even worse. The government stepped in quickly. Dubai's government-run newspaper, Al Bayan, published an article reassuring the public that the Dubai government and the central bank were in control of the situation, and that all deposits at Dubai Islamic Bank were safe and guaranteed by the government. This government guarantee was crucial to calm people down and stop them from pulling their money out of the bank. The article also mentioned that an investigation was underway, and that the bank manager, Mohammed Ayub, and two of his associates had been detained on charges of embezzling between 200 and 500 million dirhams from the bank. Of course, the bank's owners were going to bear most of the losses, as it was a private bank, and it would have collapsed without the government's intervention to save it. But, of course, this bailout came with the price of the government gaining a large share of ownership in the bank. There aren't many details about the trial of the bank manager and his associates, but, according to the article in the newspaper, 17 people were sentenced to 3 years in prison in connection with the case. The defendants were of various nationalities, and most were bank employees, which partly explains how such large amounts of money were taken out of the bank. It's clear the manager wasn't acting alone, or at least he was able to convince a lot of employees to cover it up. Were they benefiting from this cover-up? Only God knows. The article also confirmed that the total amount embezzled by the main defendant, bank manager Mohammed Ayub, exceeded 890 million dirhams that belonged to the bank. As for Sissoko, he was also among the 17 people sentenced, but he was convicted in absentia since he remained in Mali. Everyone got 3 years in prison, but I don't know why that specific length of time was decided. In 1999, as we said, Dubai Islamic Bank filed a lawsuit against Citibank in the US, accusing them of accepting large transfers without following the proper procedures. In the case, Dubai Islamic Bank demanded compensation of up to $151 million. But the case ended, apparently, without Citibank paying any compensation. The lawyers hired by Dubai Islamic Bank in the US tried to investigate the matter and trace the money, and they almost confirmed that Mohammed Ayub, the bank manager, and his associates didn't personally benefit from any of the money. All the money that was transferred went to Sissoko, so they didn't gain anything financially. And this brings us back to the same question again. Why did the bank manager transfer all this money? It's still a strange mystery. As for Sissoko, Interpol, the international police organization, issued an arrest warrant for him, meaning if he traveled anywhere, he could be arrested immediately. So, Sissoko stayed in his home country of Mali, where Mali doesn't have any extradition agreements with other countries. To protect himself even more, He became a diplomat by running for parliament in 2002. He won the election because of his popularity with the people, so he became a member of the Malian parliament and got diplomatic immunity. He figured that even if he traveled, he couldn't be arrested because of that immunity. I'm not sure if he ever traveled during his time in parliament, but over time, and after a few years, Sissoko's wealth started to fade because, as we mentioned, he never held on to his money and was always spending whatever he had. As time passed, his popularity seriously declined, and he lost the election in 2014, losing his seat in parliament and with it, his diplomatic immunity. Sissoko returned to his small remote village of Dabi, where he stayed for the rest of his life. In 2018, a BBC reporter managed to reach Sissoko's village and arrived at his house, where she saw him and took pictures of him with his men. She convinced him to do an interview. This was the only interview Sissoko ever did, but unfortunately, it didn't shed much light on the questions we all have. Sissoko didn't talk much and didn't give any clear details on the matter. One of the main takeaways from the interview was that Sissoko admitted to having had a huge fortune, saying that at one point in his life, he had a net worth of $400 million. But if he only stole $242 million from the bank, where did the extra millions come from? I'd say there are two possibilities. Either Sissoko exaggerated his wealth, or he was involved in other scams we haven't heard about yet. I'm leaning toward the second option. I think the scam involving Dubai Islamic Bank's manager wasn't the only con in his life. The reporter asked him about the money and where it went, and he simply said he spent it all. Then she asked him about the Dubai Islamic Bank case, and that's when he started dodging the questions. He denied it, saying, "I just went to the bank to get a car loan, that's all there was to it. I met the manager, Mohammed Ayub, and got to know him. But it was just a car loan. That's my only dealing with him." When she asked him about the $242 million and the magic, he laughed and denied pretty much everything, saying, "If I were a wizard, I wouldn't need to steal from a bank." And regarding the $242 million, he said the bank should explain how such a huge sum of money left their accounts. I felt like the reporter couldn't press him too hard since she was at his house, surrounded by his men. But she could have pushed him more and asked about the documented transfer to Citibank in the US, which was recorded in court records. She could have asked him about the bank employee he married or the massive amounts of money he spent in Miami and the US. There were plenty of questions she could have asked, but I think she was scared, and honestly, I don't blame her. Sissoko said something in the interview that really reflects his personality. You can never have enough money. Today you have 10 million, you spend it, and tomorrow you want 20 million. The day after that, you want 40 million. Money never satisfies. Sissoko continued living freely in his small village of Dabi, with no one able to reach or hold him accountable, until he passed away in 2021. And with that, we've reached the end of this strange story. If you liked this story, don't forget to hit the like button. And if you're not subscribed to the channel, click the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Thanks, and see you in the next episode. Take care.